Hello, YouTube. Welcome into episode number 8 of Exploring Every Inch of Sage. And what might also be the last episode in this series, but I'll get into why that might be in a little bit. To start off with, for episode number 8, we are playing Sentry Sage. Specifically, we're playing Arrow Einherjar, which ever since the skill got its canvas support, it's always been a very interesting and cool skill to me. But every time I've played it in the past, it kind of just fell a bit short. It was a bit hard to get set up and stuff when I was playing Erica 2. It definitely feels a lot more versatile when you're able to play like Cold Convert or Fire Convert with the skill, or just like Trinity, getting a very good and strong setup going. So let's just quickly get into it. Okay, setup. As always, we're going to have our core uniques non-corroded. In this case, we are going to do Imperial Iron Sentry. This is the helm that got reworked this season. And part of the rework is it made it so that sentries can perform multi-strikes, which is an extremely powerful tool. I'll get more into just why that's extremely powerful a bit later, but just know this is very powerful. Then for my initial setup, I was also running double rainbow. Just a very generic strong chest. I like running it. Blade Dancer's Edge. The main reason for this is we need this line right here. Max sentry quantity +1. This is really important for our build, because before you have a Price's Bow, you have no way to get +2 sentry quant. And an Omni Elixir non-corroded, as always. Then we have full tier 1 gear, no Price's gear. Nothing too special or out of the ordinary for what you would expect for price for like tier 1 gear. We have the 40-year memory, so a cheap slash early game revival. So we are playing a projectile skill, so we're doing again projectile speed on every single year memory. And for our revival, we're just doing the generic one of Elixir Skills Gain 4 Charging Progress and Aura Effect. Just same old as always. Nothing too special here. Then we have our cheap micro plus medium fates. So I went for multi-strike chance for my micros, but for the mediums, you could do like multi-strike chance again for the mediums or multi-strike damage increment. But something that I see a lot of like Erica wants to early league, which I think is fairly cheap to do, is this Kismet Hound, which gives you a chance for multi-strike and multi-strike damage increment. So it's like a 2-for-1er. So this is just like a minor like efficiency thing that you can do instead, which just gives a bit more stats than if you were to do multi-strike chance or multi-strike damage increment. Even though both the multi-strike chance and the multi-strike damage increment on their own have like a higher roll value, this one combined I think is overall more stats. Then we're doing full legendary pets. So our pets for today is Kitty Express, Elixir Ferris, and Poised Omen. This is one of the few builds where we can use Poised Omen, because we're still getting the value from our Sage Euro memory of like, you know, empowering our curse and automatically using it every 7 seconds, on top of having an additional curse on our Iron Sentry, because enemies within 8 meters are cursed with Timid. Now, 8 meters is a bit of a short range, so I'm kind of iffy on like how actually effective this is or isn't, but you know, it is what it is, right? It is in the item, so you kind of do have to play around it in some way. Then we have ×3 2 modded corners, ×2 1 more starlights, with one of them being 2 modded. This actually eventually did change to ×2 modded, because initially what I was doing is I was using this Fallen Starlight to generate Focus Blessings, and then my other Fallen Starlight was let me just go back to our base setup. And our other Fallen Starlight was this +1 first skill with additional sentry damage and sentry start time. This is max 21. We mostly want this for the sentry start time to reduce the delay from when you summon the sentries to when they start attacking. So it's quite nice to have. And then this is just kind of like a niche combo where it ended up being very cheap to buy. But instead of this Focus Blessings, I did mess around with the build a bit, and eventually I ended up taking Frostbite on my tree instead, which let me buy this 20 Frostbite effect, 10% additional sentry damage. Now, when I was looking at builds, I saw 3 common builds being played. There was Strength Stacker Arrow Einherjar that we were playing. There was this multi-strike build that they would play with Trinity. And then do like all 3 elemental damages. And then there was a Magma Skull variant where they would do Affliction effect stacking with Magma Skull. I didn't see anyone doing Prophet Cold converting. So I think like the Prophet Cold convert, like Frostbite sets and things like that, would be fairly cheap to buy. And for me personally, I just thought this made the most sense because if you ever have a first skill, it's always the strongest to convert to Cold. Cold is just the most effective damage-wise. And then continuing on, let me just show you the rest of the states, just in case you want to see them. So we have this Deception state, Persistent skill level, Paralyze. Arrow Einherjar is a persistent skill, so we're able to utilize persistent skill levels. And then Paralyze is quite obvious. We did Focus Blessing duration event, and eventually we stopped away from that. We did +1 first skill and Mark effect chance. We did all skills and Frostbite and doing cold damage. First skill damage, and then the Sentry mod. And then +1 Sentry quality that can be deployed, and +1 first skill. Now, I only realized this afterwards. At first, I got this as a mod, because if you use the Activation Medium Sentry, which we're using, you can only get +2 sentries from this, but you can summon a maximum of 4 sentries. So this +2 sentries being deployed at time makes it that this Activation Medium summons 3 sentries. So you need to get this +1 sentry quantity on a slate to summon 4 at once. But there's actually also a Kismet that does it instead, which might be better to do. And that Kismet is this one right here. This Kismet Guard gives you +1 sentry quality that can be deployed at one time. And on top of that, it also gives 6% additional sentry skill cast frequency. So it's pretty efficient, because that additional skill cast frequency is actually quite powerful. That's essentially the same as just having a 6% additional attack speed. And then if you were to do that, you can instead get a different 10% multiplier as your slate mod. But I wasn't aware of that at first, so I ended up not doing it. And we brought back the Gale Sentry that we've seen in multiple videos by now. We love this Gale pedigree. Then we also did special canvas supports. So we did Arrow Storm with a T2 mod. We did Advancement with a T0 mod. The reason we did a T0 Advancement mod is because, quite simply, there was just none listed on the market when I bought this. And this was only 600 FE. Like, the second cheapest was only 440 FE. So I figured I might as well just buy the T0 mod because it was essentially the same price as the T1 mods. And there was no T2s listed. And we also have the Fellowship support with a T2 roll. Then we have times 2 precise auras. The auras we chose for today was precise projectiles because of the projectile speed, and weapon amplification. Weapon amplification is just because it has the physical tag, and we have a lot of plus physical levels in the build. And we're only using basic elixirs. We're using Thirst Dew, Life Tonic, and for mapping we equip Swiftness Dew. Now you might notice that we have Arrow Einherjar not in our main skill slot. The reason for that being is Kitty Express specifically wants you to... Kitty Express only gives you stacks of Feline Stimulant if you trigger your main skill. Now, if you were to use Arrow Einherjar, you would trigger your main skill very infrequently because the Sentry Medium only triggers when you need to resummon your sentries. So by instead having Thirst Dew be our main skill, and then using ES medium, or in this case I'm just using perpetual motion because I don't it's because it's the same thing. You get max stacks of feline stimulant at all times. So starting off, we did a generic low-budget cold convert setup. So I did start off by using a Phantasmagoria in this build, with my logic being that we are playing a multi-strike build, so having a multi-strike damage increment in the build on a Phantasmagoria would be very efficient. But I couldn't really find like any where to put the Phantasmagoria where you would be able to get like a bunch of this multi-strike increment, because it does require to be a legendary medium talent. So I very quickly dropped that idea and instead went for Crushing Blast, and I crafted my own Crushing Blast because there was none on the market that were cheap. And essentially when I was crafting my Crushing Blast, I just kept going until I hit either max Frostbite rating, or until I hit, I kept trying to hit either max Frostbite rating, or to hit the multi-strike damage increment. We ended up hitting max Frostbite rating, and then we also hit this mutated core talent, which was quite lucky. But what this essentially allowed us to do is, because we're getting 30 Frostbite rating from our profit tree, we could drop max Frostbite rolls on a ring and instead go for crit damage. So it's a slight efficiency to just get us a bit more damage. But I do believe that if we had multi-strike damage increment instead of the Frostbite, it would have been better overall. And then at this point, looking at my talent tree, I did realize that we were a bit oversaturated with having too much crit in the build and not having enough attack speed and being very low on attack speed. So I just tried something very basic as a test, where I dropped these crit nodes here in God of Machines, and instead put them into this Sentry cast frequency. And doing so gave us 15 billion damage. So at this point, I felt like everything was, you know, I've done enough testing with the build, doing this double rainbow Blade Dancer Edge setup, and I wanted to test doing a Vorax item. Specifically, this mod right here from Blade Dancers, we needed to Vorax. This max Sentry quantity +1, we wanted to Vorax that. And that would allow us to instead equip a Death's Touch. Like this. A Death's Touch with the Vorax item, with the Blade Dancer's Edge, the max Sentry quantity, as well as the Only Good mod. From the only like additional damage mod from it. And this is where things got a bit strange. I expected to gain some damage, as you would, from doing so. We went from having 325 billion damage to having 1.05 trillion damage. Yes, that is correct. This build, without a priceless weapon, with just a generic ass Vorax, has 1 trillion damage, which is absolutely mind-boggling for me to think about. This is definitely, this is by far outperforming any build that we have played so far in terms of like this budget range. And this build just absolutely dominates and smacks bosses. Like, this is just absurd levels of damage to have, given the gear level. Which is why I was mentioning that multi-strike is such a potent scaler of damage, because other variations of this Arrow Iron build have damage that's way more in line with what you would expect from this build. It's only the multi-strike variant with the Imperial Iron Sentry that really, like, skyrockets so much in the damage range. Then, using a Priceless Bow, we have 2.8 trillion. Now, I did think it was important to mention this. So, this is the Vorax I used. It's a +2 attack skill level Vorax. This Blade Dancer mod can actually be applied to an item level 86 Vorax. So you do not need an item level 89/90 Vorax. You can use an 86 Vorax, which only rolls like T2 mods. And it will still be able to take the Blade Dancer's Edge. So you are able to do this on reasonably early into the game, or like into your gearing experience. Then doing a prices bow, I reached 2.8 trillion, and then I tried doing a mapping setup. So for the mapping setup, what we're essentially doing is we're replacing advancement for fellowship, because I tested both in mapping and fellowship felt about 1 billion times better. As well as equipping swiftness too, because I don't want to be a snail while I'm mapping. And then so Ted Remedy, we're just taking reflection, because Ted Remedy does nothing for the build. If Ted Remedy obviously does nothing for the build if we have 3 elixirs. And then in this mapping setup, our non-prices bow has 340 billion, our prices bow has 900 billion. Then the last thing I wanted to do is I did want to try out the Magus Call Affliction stacking build, because in my head, this build makes a ton of sense, and I would just extremely outperform like any other builds. Which is why I mentioned the multi-strike is such a potent scaler, because it did not outperform the multi-strike build. So essentially what Magma Skull does is it gives Affliction this additional effect that makes it that 20% of your additional hit fire damage taken up to 115%. So what that means is Affliction essentially is a debuff that makes enemies take additional damage up to 100% additional damage from dot damage. And then if you scale Affliction effect, this number like keeps going up. What this does is it makes it an Affliction effect gives you 20% additional hit damage that scales up to 115%, with the downside being that for every 10% Affliction effect you have minus Affliction effect per second. Now this item scales extremely well with True Flame, because True Flame makes it that when an enemy is ignited, 65% of the additional bonus damage to dot damage taken from Affliction is also applied to fire damage. So essentially, True Flame makes it that Affliction works on hit damage at 65% of the value, and then Magma Skull is, well, basically the exact same thing as True Flame, just with a downside. So what I did for this setup is we did go, obviously, Firewing, because Firewing not only gives a ton of Affliction effect, 120% Affliction effect, it also gives us Affliction infected per second, which we need to offset the downside of Magma Skull. We also went with as many slices as possible that have this 18 Affliction infected per second. And then doing so after messing around a lot with the slates, as well as setting up our pack spirits to be full-on Affliction effect on every single slot that we could put it on, as well as having 1 mercury in a bottle to have some more Affliction effect per second. I ended up having a setup that reached 360 billion damage, which I think that's a bit on the lower end for what I expected. I did actually expect a bit more than that, but I did realize a mistake that I made at the time, which was that this main skill is supported by level 40 Cataclysm. I did not actually have my Arrow Einaryor be my main skill. It was still on the 3rd slot, so it did not gain the effect from this main skill. Now, level 40 Cataclysm would essentially just make it that... let me just show you, actually. Level 40 Cataclysm would essentially make it that Affliction grants an additional 46% additional effect to the support skill, which means that both our True Flame would gain 46% additional effect, and this mod right here would gain 46% additional effect. I think that would be a substantial damage increase, but it would not barge the barrier between this setup and this setup. It would make it be much more competitive, and the damage would be much more in line with what I expected from this build. Most likely in like the 600 billion to 700 billion range, but it would still not be better than the Cold Convert setup that I already set up. And because of that, I didn't bother going back to the setup or testing it more, because I don't see any point in playing this version of the build when you can just play the multi-strike version instead. And then lastly, I'll do a mapping showcase. So this mapping showcase is with the non-prices bow using Swiftness Dew and Fellowship support. So our damage for the setup is 340 billion. And then while I'm doing the mapping, I'm going to talk about why I said this might be the last episode in the series. We've essentially reached now a point in the season where the markets are really starting to dry up. Like, it is becoming increasingly difficult to, like, do testing and set up builds and things. Because every time I want to buy an item, I click price check, and I'll see, like, a total of 2 items listed. And even if that item I think is worth only 50 FE, if there's only 2 listed and they're both listed for 2k FE, like, what can I do? I just have to either pay a premium to be able to buy the items, or I just can't test the build, or I can't test it in the way that I want to test it. That is one part of the reason why I'm thinking of just stopping the series here, even though there's still more builds I do want to test. Because as you can see, there's still a few builds here that I do want to try out. But the other reason also being that I only have 27k FE left in my bank. I'm down to 27k FE. And I do want to have some FE left when the patch notes come out. Because when the patch notes comes out, I do want to decide on which build I want to play. And once I decide on the build that I want to play, I want to spend my FE doing more testing for that build in particular. Testing out different price points in the build and not just testing this like one static setup that I've been testing the various setups of right now. But overall, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Sorry if my voice was a bit dead. I've been streaming for 8.5 hours straight, so I've been yapping a lot today. But I hope you enjoyed the video, YouTube. And I'll see you all again next time. I think the future series that I'm going to be working on is I do actually want to make some videos talking about different farming strats in this game and helping like new players understand how to farm in this game. So please look forward to it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day further. Bye, YouTube. Bye-bye.